We're ready.
We're ready.
Cool.
Ready. We're in.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Perk and Pace podcast. So today's guest, we've got Mr. Max Hartman. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Woo.
So Max started his career in the world of pro sport, so working in therapy, rehab roles at clubs like Leicester Tigers, Ealing Rugby, and British Snow Sport, before transitioning into the world of S&C. Currently leading the performance department at MSC Performance, and also worked at the performance department at Coventry Rugby, and now coaching privately and providing rehab services at MSC Performance in Birmingham. Welcome to the
Thank you for
podcast.
having me. It's a good write-up. Strong.
Who wrote
Who
that?
wrote that?
I don't know.
Before we get into the business end of it,
Yeah.
we have a bit of a ritual here on
Okay,
the Perk and
okay.
Pace podcast, whereby I bring a coffee
Mm-hmm.
and I make it for Matt and we discuss it. Are you a coffee fan? Would you like to join us?
I am. I feel like I drink enough coffee. Whether
Yeah.
that makes me a coffee aficionado or qualified to taste
Find
it.
out. There's
We'll
no
see.
judgment
We'll
here,
see.
though, by the way. So
We
I've
will
made
see.
everyone a coffee today, so let's have a little taste.
Cheers. Thank you.
It smells fucking awesome.
Smells good.
Go out like I know what I'm doing now.
Go on, what's it smell of? Tell us.
Peach, I'm getting peach.
Oh,
peach
okay.
flavours.
We're going straight in with the notes.
If in doubt, taste like
Yeah.
peach. Right. So I think that's really acidic. And by acidic, I mean like the difference between, like, you know, when if you were to have like really, really like undiluted squash and it
Okay.
kind of like fills your mouth with saliva, that sort of is the feeling I'm getting in my mouth.
It's definitely sharp. It's got like an aftertaste. doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what I mean by that. This coffee is from a Birmingham-based roaster, whoop, called Dialect, and it's from Colombia. Now, when I say this, if you knew the owner, Mark, this would make perfect sense. He is the biggest coffee geek ever, and he's always looking for the weird and wonderful. This is a spontaneous ferment, depulped, pulp and yeast fermentation, thermal shock, dehumidified coffee.
Love it.
I would have gone with that.
Yeah, no,
First notes, that's what I've got with
tip of
it.
my tongue.
But it's typical of that sort of coffee, right? This is what
Yeah,
I'd expected.
yeah.
Okay.
But just to sort of, in a nutshell, what that means, if anybody's interested, the thermal shock thing is the really interesting thing. It's like coffee is a fruit, and it's what you do to the fruit to get flavour out of it into the bean. And thermal shock is like the coffee is subjected to cold water, hot water, like it's,
okay.
and
Yeah.
that
Okay.
means that the flavour is taken into the bean in a different way. So when I put out on my Instagram, like, internet, send me crazy coffees to make
Yeah.
for Matt. And Mark, you delivered. Thank you so much.
Very cool branding as well.
Oh, he is cool, yeah. So that's what we're supping on today. And we do have some funny quickfire questions to start.
Okay.
If that's all right.
This is stuff I'm prepared for, isn't it? Okay.
Okay.
Let's go.
You have to choose. Don't overthink it.
Okay.
Espresso or flat white?
Flat white.
Oh, brunch or dinner? Don't overthink it.
Brunch.
Or
out for
dinner.
out for brunch, home for dinner.
Nice.
the one.
Okay. Scrambled or poached eggs?
Poached.
Right.
Controversial.
Is that controversial? Is it? Okay.
Have you ever asked for a discretionary service charge to be removed from a bill?
Yes.
No, you haven't.
Yes, I have.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. But only when I feel like it's warranted. There was a certain, I won't name any names, a certain restaurant in Birmingham that I've always really loved, and I've gone back there since, but it went through a bit of a bad patch.
Interesting.
Can I name names?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. No, name names.
Not in that scenario.
It's not saying kitchen. It's not saying kitchen.
Oh my God.
It went through a bad patch. There was objectively bad service, and I've since gone back there and paid a service charge.
I own hospitality businesses, and I've never had the balls to ask for a discretionary service charge to be taken. Have you?
No comment.
Okay.
It wouldn't be my default move.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be my default move.
You've got balls, man. Balls of steel.
No, but like I don't like making a scene, but I have.
Yeah.
Final one.
Okay.
Customer service pet peeve.
Ooh. Well, just objectively bad service.
What does that mean?
As in, I don't know, how do you quantify this? I haven't spent time quantifying.
I hate getting
but
rushed. You know, when you're
Yeah,
looking
okay.
at the menu and you're
if
trying
there's
to.
people still eating
Yeah.
and
All
plates
clearing
start getting
plates.
cleared, yes, yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Or sorry, go on.
No, it's good. It's good. Okay. So, what you're here for? We're going to discuss loads of things
the
today.
ins and outs.
But first of all, like what you do, Matt just gave a lovely roundup of what it is that you do. What makes you love what you do?
A lot of time in coaching, this is people sort of say you need to be who you needed when you were younger.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
It's my kind of. I spent a lot of time playing sport when I was younger, and there was probably a lot of instances where young kind of playing team sports and whatnot, you probably could have done with some level of provision of like S&C, rehab stuff, physio type work. So yeah, I think that's probably why I enjoy it.
That's nice.
Good answer.
Love that.
Is that appropriate?
Yeah.
Good. Okay.
Okay. What's the big dream or passion? What are we working towards?
There's a few ideas bubbling away. Everything's on hold for the next year or so for obvious reasons. We've got.
It's not necessarily obvious.
We've got me and my wife got twins arriving in, well, potentially like 7-8 weeks. So for now it's like a very steady ship. Enjoy being a dad for obviously as many years as that entails. And then there's some moves afoot in the long run. We'll see.
I once heard you refer to fatherhood as an 18-year AMRAP.
18-year AMRAP, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's such a good segment.
Minimum, yeah.
That's always stuck with me.
Change
So
nappy,
good.
repeat.
And for anyone who doesn't know what that
repeat.
means, AMRAP is as many reps as possible.
Yeah.
Just keep going until you fail.
Just go, yeah, exactly that.
threshold, I
Exactly. So that's going to be wild. And then, over the next sort of few years, we'll see where business takes me. But there's a few things bubbling.
Cool. On the topic of obviously health and wellness in general, what do you think's the main driver behind, I guess you can call it like the gradual progression of people really wanting to focus on their health and well-being? Like the last few years, it seems to have really taken people aren't going out as much. They're focusing more on longevity and exercise. What have you seen?
I think we were speaking briefly before cameras started rolling. Like, it has gone from people seeing gym as like a hobby or something they just kind of they do because in theory they know they need to really taking it that extra step of like you have people who are again participating in functional fitness, actually competing in various different disciplines, but it's almost like this huge identity around it as well now. It's not just people who do X, Y, and Z and also go to the gym. There's like this huge social class around actually people who train, people who exercise, and whether it's powerlifters, crossfitters, high roxers, the gym shark the gym shark girl, sort of stuff. It's just it's a whole new thing now, which is wild. Which is wild to see, crazy.
Yeah. Do you think more people, and again from your perspective as a coach, have you seen more people transitioning to that straight away, or are they still coming to you to just do the basics right and then progress?
I think a lot of time people come into that and where I normally come in kind of straddling that line between performance and rehab. A lot of time I see people where they've maybe just started a fitness journey. They've seen someone powerlifting online and been like, I want to do that. Yeah. And then 3 months down the line, they've just gone like all in on powerlifting, not really knowing how to navigate that. And then come to me when they kind of say, well, either like I've plateaued or actually like I've hurt myself doing it. So people go like right in at the deep end on trying to be super specific in one area or one sort of pursuit, whereas actually they've just got no base to work from.
Yeah.
Just get basics nailed down. Like you see, there's so much that you get from having an actual foundation of fitness that you can then sort of dovetail into a given pursuit or a given sort of challenge or task. But without that kind of base, without any kind of underlining tolerance to fitness, you just can't do it.
No, that leads perfectly to the next question. So where do you think people are going wrong or sort of coming up short regarding exercise programs or approaches? And
so I think like the first thing I'd say is like you never want to. Anyone doing any exercise is great. Like if someone gets off the sofa and starts training when they've otherwise been sedentary, I'd never want to discourage that. If people are kind of getting paralyzed trying to find what is perfect or what is a perfect setup, like if someone's getting out and moving, happy days. That being said, like we're obviously trying to form habits that are lifelong practices, habits that you actually stick with for a long period of time. And a pretty good way of derailing that is either getting injured or just not seeing any progress or falling off that. And that's a pretty good way of people just losing the habit. So the big thing I'd probably say is like people really confuse genuine sort of intensity and effectiveness with just something that is just hard and suffering. And they have no real ability to quantify what they're doing. And if they do actually have a goal that they've outlined or kind of written down or actually said to themselves that's what they're after, they don't necessarily know what the variables are or what kind of levers to twist and what kind of knobs to push and pull to actually move them towards that. So you just have this vague idea of hard work without actually really working towards a desired outcome.
Yeah, and this is we spoke about this on previous episodes, and just to dive in a little bit deeper, we will talk about obviously like output and work and how specific people should be if they can be, rather than just going into any sort of gym or environment and just trying to kill themselves for 45 minutes
Yeah.
and not having a Scooby-Doo what they're doing. They just feel like, because I've had my heart rate at 180 for 30 minutes, I must be getting fitter. So talk to us about the importance of just, as a metric, basic like heart rate training and why it's effective. And, even from people that are just trying to get fit, like they're doing couch to 5K, all the way up to people who really want to get results and get fitter, whatever that word means. Talk to us about
So there's loads you can unpack in that. So the biggest thing for people listening who aren't really sure what it is, heart rate zones generally, and it depends what kind of school of thought you're at. It's normally from 50% of your maximum heart rate in 10% increments. Zone 1 to 5. Zone 1 being sort of 50 to 60, and zone 5 being like 90 to 100% your maximum heart rate. Heart rate generally increases with intensity of movement. The faster you run, the higher your heart rate goes. The harder you cycle, the higher your heart rate goes, to a point, because we can only go up to a certain amount. And training in different heart rate zones for different periods of time yields different adaptations. It's not a question of just, well, if I cycle more, I get faster. It's how you dose your exercise, whether you do really easy exercise for really long periods of time every day, or whether you do really, really super intensive exercise once a week. Different periods of time in different doses yields different adaptations that then kind of all these different adaptations, all these different changes in different areas of your bodies add up to being the finished product, which is your speed on a bike or your speed of running.
Before we go into like what those different things do and like mixing them up, because I mean, Max actually coaches me, so this is a journey I've been on recently, is understanding this. When you say maximum heart rate, obviously I know there are tests you can do to find out your maximum heart rate, but how would the average person know what that is?
So as a general rule for men, like the old thinking is like 220 minus your age. For women, it's going to be a little bit lower generally, but that's also a trainable quality. Like you can push that up higher, or for some people who are like super unfit, it might be a little bit lower. Albeit if you're unfit, it's a lower max heart rate, but you'll get there quicker. You see what I mean? But then there's also, like I said, there was also just a real skill of getting really comfortable with actually pushing hard enough and dealing with that long enough to get to a maximum heart rate. Most people who aren't fit will not be able to tolerate the discomfort of pushing hard enough for long enough to actually hit their max, and that you got to take time to get up to it.
I can hard relate to that. When I first started working with Max, one of the things I said to him was, what did I say to you?
Just anything above like 60%, you just like, I just do not want to do that.
So I said I'm scared of zone 5.
Yes, yeah,
so then
yeah.
The first...
It might even have been zone 4. It might have been 4.
Let's be honest, it was probably zone 4.
Then the first program he gave me was, I thought, really clever. Is it was like, do 2 minutes in like zone 3, 2 minutes zone 4, and then like 2 minutes zone 5, and you just over time you elongated those periods of time, acclimatizing me to feeling like that. Like to get used to feeling like that. And now I can say, what, a year later? Maybe less. Maybe like 9 months later.
Yeah.
I don't think like that anymore. Like I am just working hard and I'm much more comfortable with it. So I can see that in the real world, how that works.
Yeah. But there's the big thing that I think people really lose sight of, and we'll probably come into this as well, is and I was trying to work out what the best way to kind of put this into words is. When I kind of, before we came on here, I was trying to work out what the best way of putting this together is. Like everyone kind of intuitively knows, like, the harder you work, the shorter the period of time is that you can sustain that for. Like there's a reason why, a 5K pace is different to 10K pace is different to marathon pace, because, the harder you go and the more you go up through those zones, the less time you can actually sustain a certain output. And that's where, and again, going back to where people kind of often go wrong, and one of the big things about heart rate zone training, if you come from especially like a track and field background, you always understand that there's this really big variable of actually like work to rest ratios, understanding there's a certain amount of time you can sustain a certain speed, and that's normally tied to a certain heart rate. And again, going back to almost kind of the last question, where people really go wrong is if you get your work periods wrong, if you get your rest periods wrong, the relationship between output and heart rate really begins to untether. So if we said to, Usain Bolt, run at your 100-meter pace and run 100 meters and just keep doing that as long as you can, he ain't going to sustain that pace for 5K, 10K. He's not going to sustain it for 200 meters. So you get to this point a lot of time where you are in this super, super, super high output. It really drops off. Your heart rate stays super high. So you're getting all this fatigue, all this kind of stress, heart going through the roof, and you're barely moving. And that's where people really, really kind of, if you don't have an appreciation for what your heart rate is, what zone you're training in, and actually putting that into some sort of structure, you just get this kind of junk volume where your heart rate's super high, you're at really high injury risk, your stress is super high, but you're just getting nothing from it. There's a lot to be said for the adaptations that happen for spending time in heart rate zones, but there's also an understanding that like you need to actually match that with output.
Yeah.
You're not getting the benefit of, really high threshold training if you're not moving very fast. Part of the benefit is in actually running faster and sustaining faster running for longer periods of time. And to do that, you've got to have appropriate work periods, appropriate rest periods, and change those over time.
Yeah. And for me as well, I always, and I was terrible at this when I was younger, but talk to us about, I suppose, the benefits of, we speak about, like training, heart rate zones or training zones, whatever you want to call it, but even thinking of it from a work and output perspective that you'd associate with like, your zone 4s where it's like your anaerobic threshold, lactic threshold, whatever, but also from a recovery perspective. So like, zone 2, still having zone 2 within your weekly program or load, whatever you want to call it, is still vital from a recovery perspective as well.
It's massive. So and the big thing is, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because if you're struggling to recover from your training sessions as it is, even though zone 2 stuff or like slow steady state work is in theory low stress and it can help kind of shake out the legs, if you're already struggling to recover from what you're doing, putting in more zone 2 work or more training, albeit at a low level, is still an extra stressor to some extent. If you're someone who's tolerating the work that you're doing, if you're recovering fairly well, you might not be able to go out and do hard 400 meter repeats today, but you can definitely get on a bike and sit at zone 2 for half an hour or 40 minutes. So it's a really, really useful sort of tool in that the actual cost of low zone, sort of zone 2, zone 3 training, it's such a low fatigue and such a low stress cost if you do it right. And then if you pair that together with the fact that the benefit you get from it is in a dose and like a dose response relationship. So across the course of a week or a month, the more time you can spend in that zone, the more benefit you get from it. And that's almost just a linear relationship.
Even the modality as well. So like I especially as I've gotten older, I've tried to stay away from the pressure of, you need to get loads of mileage in your feet for like a zone 2. I'll just jump on a bike. It'll stop, save me injury myself, save me having more load, which a lot of running is on the body. So that's something that
and there's definitely like, there's definitely an argument to say that from a conditioning perspective, if you really want to get better at a given sport or a given pursuit, like you've got to spend time doing that. So if you were a marathon runner and you did all your really long steady state stuff exclusively on a bike, there's not going to be that same level of crossover. But again, there's still benefit to be had. If you physically can't go out and run that day because your legs are knackered, you can still go on a bike and do conditioning then. So that's where the utility comes in. And again, if we go back to, I keep coming back to what people do kind of right and wrong, what we see in the gym all the time, is people actually just training too hard too often. It's not sustainable. I say if we're trying to build fitness over time, which is where fitness really is built, it's not built over the course of a week or a month, is if you just try and put in too many threshold sessions, too many interval sessions, too many, again, like high rock specific sessions, and all we're doing is going in like pushing heavy prowlers and running hard 1K repeats. There's only so long you can sustain that for. Whereas like the real benefit, if you can just start accumulating an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours a week in zone 2, whether it's on feet or on the bike, you can just sustain that for such a long period of time.
Something I'd just like to make sure that like listeners understand, because it's something that I have only recently started to understand. So like when I came out of the double high rocks I did with my sister, and it felt horrible. And I then saw my next program and I nearly called bullshit on it, because it was like, I was like, right, it felt horrible being in zone 5 for that long. So in my head, I'm like, well, I should just work harder all the time. Exactly what you just said. I was about, like, if I'd been left to my own devices, I would have made exactly that mistake. But then we went through maybe even 3 blocks where my heart rate didn't go past zone 4. And I came out of it the fittest I've ever been. Explain why.
So, I mean, there's a load of stuff that comes from that. But, I mean, the biggest thing is, you almost kind of answered the question there, is you got through 4 training blocks in that time. So in that time frame, you accumulated a hell of a lot of work, and over each one of those blocks as well, over 3, 4, 5, 6 week periods, you started off doing a certain amount of work, and then you just built and built and built. So you spent longer and longer in that zone doing that task, or you ran at a certain pace for longer, or we kept your heart rate at a certain amount, and because of the adaptations that were happening, you were then running faster and faster in that time at that heart rate. So you kind of answered your own question that you accumulated a boatload of training in that time. But, so much of, going back to what we were saying at the start, so much of like top end fitness or top end output to some extent is determined by the base that you have and the aerobic capacity that you have and the VO2 max that you have. And then when you can then apply that to tasks over time, you can then start to push harder and harder, because if you push hard enough, and like I said, you start pushing above, well, definitely above lactate threshold, but then above another marker which is called like lactate turning point, or LT2, that intensity of work, like we said, then becomes unsustainable. So the fitter you are, the bigger your aerobic base, the higher your output is at zone 2, you can work harder and harder and harder before you flick over into that kind of area which is unsustainable, or that level of intensity that is unsustainable, which is what we call like anaerobic capacity or anaerobic kind of fitness. So the greater your anaerobic capacity is, if you start running at 7-minute kilometers, aerobic, highly sustainable. You can do that for, in theory, hours, assuming your legs can handle it and you've got enough fuel on board. If you then go to 6-minute kilometers, you can still tolerate it, still aerobic. You go to 5:30 kilometers, maybe that's starting to get to realms of unsustainable, but you can still do it for a long period of time. Whereas there's going to be a tipping point where you then hit 5-minute kilometers or 4:45. That is a really short-term output, and you can't do that for very long. So the more you can push that threshold and the higher you can push that, which is a lot of the time, that's the benefit we get from aerobic work. That's a benefit you get from more extensive, lower intensity sessions. The higher that threshold, the higher that the higher the output is at the point that switch is flipped.
Yeah, I always think that most people go wrong with, going back to that conversation about how people train, and they think because they're training hard and they're sweating for 45 minutes, that's their lactic threshold work. When the reality is they never really work at their lactic threshold point.
Yeah.
So, going back to that conversation of how important the rest to work period is, if you're doing it properly, like if you're doing K reps and then you're doing 2-3 minutes recovery to allow your heart rate to drop so you can go back up to that threshold.
That's a hard session.
Yeah, and that's where the adaptation takes place. So when you look at high rocks, most people get fucked because they don't actually really get to that threshold point. They're just in that grey area that we spoke about. It's like, I'm just working hard for hard's sake.
And again, like they go, and again, like we said, it's people coming to the gym and they see what high rocks is, and they just train in ways that look like that. And they just say everything they do is under fatigue, everything they do is under stress, and every time they run, their legs are burning by the time they start the rep. Every time they run, it's just coming straight off the back of a prowler push or straight off the back of a rower. And then, like I said, you get this uncoupling of outputs where like your heart rate is super high but your running speed is really low. Whereas actually what you'd rather do, like you said, is like take big rests in between certs. And again, you get to a point where you have to do like sim sessions, and as you get closer to race, you've got to understand what your pacing is, like what it feels like to run at that level. Because whether you're talking about like fitness, conditioning, strength, there's a massive skill component to all of that. So you've got to be able to have the skill of running on heavy legs. But generally speaking, the biggest factor that feeds into what your ultimate like high rocks or half marathon time, whatever it is, the biggest thing that feeds into that is all the physiological stuff underneath it, which is like your VO2 max, your pace at lactate threshold. It's not how good you are at running on tired legs, which is all people mainly deal with.
And so I'm just going to butt in, but you see the guys and girls that are at the top of their game, it's not necessarily because they're better strength athletes or better runners, it's that their threshold is higher than everybody else's, and they can do more work at a lower heart rate.
And if you have a really long run up and you say I'm doing a high rocks in a year's time, you almost really split your week up. You don't just go straight into it doing like Metcon 6 days a week and high rocks sim 6 days a week. You spend a long time building up really high levels of strength, really high levels of muscularity, getting to the point where like your physique is, you are muscular and lean and strong, and you can then apply that to like your chosen sport. So they will, the best guys and girls and the people at their peak, and this is for all kind of, whether it's functional fitness, whether it's even just pure endurance sports, they're not treating heavy sled pushes under fatigue as their strength work. They go in the gym doing squats, deadlifts, split squats, heavy strength training on fresh legs with long rest periods a couple of times a week. Then on other days they're doing long steady runs, and on other days they're doing interval running. So you don't just go in there and say, right, well, this is what IROX looks like, so that's my day now. That comes in. But
the thing I think about that, and we're big High Rocks fans, this isn't a criticism of the High Rocks brand. I think what they're doing is really, really clever. But if you follow their Instagram or their website and they give out their weekly session or their daily session, it is a lot of sim stuff. because I think from their brand perspective, they want you training that like that all the time.
They want to make it feel like it's inclusive and everybody can do it.
Yeah.
But like you say, maybe that's also where someone might be going wrong if they maybe don't have a coach or have that relationship with somebody. Is I think, I'll just follow the programs that I can find on the website. That will just have you doing that all the time.
It's the CrossFit WOD model, isn't it? Like that's been going for years. Like, it was literally just released from CrossFit HQ, like the workout of the day every day, and you go into a CrossFit gym and that was just what everyone was doing on that day. Like, it'd be a question doing loads of, again, I've literally never done CrossFit in my life, but and I don't plan on it, don't get me wrong. But like you just go in and do a WOD, and like I say, you just get these super high heart rates and just junk volume every day. But then you see like all the actual real best guys and girls in
Not
that
doing
gym
that.
are in the corner doing like strict training like an Olympic weightlifter or training like an Olympic rower, because they know they need to build those capacities and those skills. You've got to be able to actually just do something to a good level before you can do it well under fatigue and under high stress. So like, get the skill first, actually be good at something before you try and do that as part of, a jumble of other.
So playing devil's advocate then, and I appreciate there's so much that goes into this, but with the rise of, and again you've probably seen it with your client base, people that are literally new to a gym environment, but they still want to progress into like fitness racing or whatever we want to call it. What would be a cookie cutter approach to, like, if you were to set up the ideal Hyrox program for somebody? And I know it obviously depends on their background and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I think as a starting point, like, and this probably comes from my own background of starting off being very much like in the kind of rehab and the therapy sphere, and then moving more and more towards strength and conditioning and performance. Like, I think there's a big, especially in rehab circles or therapy circles, there's a really, really big focus on like optimizing movement and on biomechanics and on movement quality, to the point where everything is like a corrective exercise. Everything, quote unquote, is a rehab exercise, and it looks like that early on. Whereas actually, I think, and this is probably the biggest way I've changed my own approach to coaching in the last few years, to start off with, the biggest thing I'd say to people, especially even if someone comes in with a chronic injury, chronic shoulder pain, chronic back pain or whatnot, and it probably applies to beginners in the gym anyway, before you start talking about anything else, it's like, well, are you in the gym just doing like basic full body strength training 2 or 3 times a week? If you're not doing that, there's no conversation to be had on top of that anyway. Like I said, people kind of get really bogged down in this idea of like moving well, movement efficiency, mechanics and whatnot. But if you're not just like strong, fit, muscular, lean to start off with, you're just optimizing a system that's already inherently fragile. You're trying to make something look and move really, really well when it has no capacity anyway. So as a starting point, people come in the gym and it's push, pull, squat, hinge 2 or 3 times a week, with some sort of conditioning on the end of it. Once a week, they'll go like super easy. And for some people, it's starting off getting them walking. I think that's where the real value of steps are for a lot of people. It's just like, are you moderately active a couple of times a week? That can then turn into off-feet zone 2 bike stuff for a couple of times a week. That can then turn into running. And then once you're kind of comfortable with that, and like I said, they can tolerate getting into zone 3 for 20 minutes at a time, or zone 2 for half an hour at a time, you can then start dipping in and out of some intervals, and you can start pushing them a little bit higher. But before you can get someone in the gym doing 2 or 3 good quality full body strength sessions a week with a little bit of conditioning, something that is low and slow, something that is like hard and fast, that's your base. I mean, until you've got that in place and you've got a significant amount of time getting those kind of sessions under your belt, there's not really much of a conversation to be had anywhere else. Like I say, for most people, even if you're not necessarily working on anything that even looks remotely Hyrox specific, even if you don't go near any aerobic conditioning, if they put on some muscle, lose some fat, and get stronger, like they'll start off at a better place.
I think I think with Hyrox as well, and obviously it's still ultimately a new sport, even though it's been around for 3-4 years, maybe a little bit longer. There is almost like there's no perfect way to train for it. And I think that you see triathletes crossing over, you see ex-rugby players, ex-CrossFit people, so it's exciting in that sense that we can have such a wide variety of training principles to get better at Hyrox. Go on.
I was going to say, obviously I came to you saying, I can't run, make me be able to do a Hyrox, basically. What was the message?
Make me fast.
Make me faster. All credit, you have. But I think, have you seen that pattern in other clients as well? As in, we mentioned before, it's more popular, it's more fashionable now to be doing this kind of thing, this kind of goal, something like that. Have you seen that as a general pattern? You're getting more clients saying things like that to you?
Yeah, but the good thing is, I think with with high rocks as a pursuit or as a kind of as a sport in itself, I think the actual technical barrier to entry, and this is why it's getting so popular, is so low. It's so low compared to, I mean, to actually compete at a decent level, there is a super high barrier to entry in terms of like how fit you have to be, the kind of condition you have to be in. But again, like going back to the example of CrossFit, like you couldn't go to any, even the most basic CrossFit competition, if you couldn't Olympic weightlift, if you couldn't do handstand walks, if you can't do gymnastics, never mind the running, swimming, cycling, whatever it might be. Whereas the actual technical barrier to entry is so low. But again, like I say, the kind of barrier that really stops people now is people are just coming into it, like I said, and they've got no base of training from in any sense, and they just come in and say, like, I want to do that. And it's like, well, just like get fit first before you start competing with other people on how fit you are. That's probably the biggest thing I'd say. Like, but everyone will come in. It's not necessarily always running. If someone comes in and they're a runner, almost at the opposite end of your background, if someone comes in and they're a runner and they've got great running times, but they haven't squatted in years, like they ain't moving a sled. Like they're not pushing it, they're not pulling it, they're not moving it, or they're going to blow their legs up on the wall balls if they get that far. So like
tap out halfway.
Exactly. So like, you know, there's still varied demands and varied needs, obviously. Even if the kind of technical side of it isn't as high as CrossFit or as high as doing, you know, maybe other sports, but there's still serious barriers to entry because you've got to be good at so many different things.
So I originally met you because I was injured.
Yes.
So I was the classic, I went to the gym because I knew I should, had no focus. I thought I was Billy Big Bollocks because I could squat 40 kilograms. I know, hard
all
to
those
believe.
years ago.
I know.
All those years
but I had
ago.
a shoulder injury and so bad that I couldn't even like brush my hair. And I went to the doctor and they told me the classic, and we've joked about it many times since, stop and take ibuprofen.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the, and that was like 8 years ago when I met you and I came in, and then I ended up just going to the gym, and you, exactly what you've just said, you live it. It was like, let's get a strength base, let's start these things. But then if you go on the NHS website now and you Google any symptoms, it is stop doing what you're doing, take ibuprofen. And I know that's not your philosophy. I think just interesting to know, like when you're coaching clients or when they do have injuries and niggles, how do you get them to maintain an exercise program, and why is that so important?
So I think the biggest thing as far as actually maintaining a program is understanding like what your commitments are and what your ability to commit is, I should say, really. Like if someone comes in and they're super busy, whether it's with work, family, any commitments outside the gym, there's no point me turning around and saying, to sort your issue, you need to be in this gym an hour and a half a day, 6 days a week. Like it just ain't gonna work. And that's probably something that scares people off in the first place anyway. Like to start getting fit, like I say, there's so much benefit going from 0 to 1. There's loads of benefit going from 1 to 2, 2 to 3 and whatnot. Like, but past that, if you're in the gym sort of 2-3 times a week, that's going to start to really talk to people about like what you're actually doing in those sessions as well. So a massive thing is, you know, actually understanding what kind of time frames you've got to play with, and actually just sort of meeting someone in the middle, really. If I turn around and say you need to be in 3 times a week and they say I can do 2, so well, let's make that work then. Let's try and find something that works.
Well, a really good example is when I was getting ready to race in Barcelona and I did my hamstring like maybe 3-4 weeks before. I was panicking like hell.
Yeah.
And honestly, the way that we approached it when you were helping me at the time with my strength work was to, you know, load the injury isometrically. We did, you know, I committed, to your point, to 2 or 3 times a week coming in. By race day, I was, because I'd loaded it that way and not just left it and rested it and iced it, you know.
And there's definitely times where, you know, if someone's got something that is like super inflamed, super angry, then there is definitely times where we need to kind of back off and kind of rest and say, like, if we try and load that now, we're just going to cause more damage. But then there's also times, this probably comes from times in working with sport and working with team sport athletes in particular. If you say like the cup final is in 4 weeks, and it's something, and again, it's something like a hamstring that, although at the time it's a big injury for you personally, like if we overload that, like your leg's not going to fall off. So like from an ethical perspective, if we push now a little bit and see how far we can push it to get you to the cup final, then it's worth doing that. Obviously, if it's a head injury, a concussion, or like a neck injury or something, it's not a question of like, well, let's just like throw them out there and see what happens. Obviously, that's not the way you go. So there's times to kind of back off, but then there's definitely certain injuries like that where I actually think if we just push now a little bit more, there's massive like pain killing effects from that. Even if in a week's time, you're not causing that hamstring to heal over the course of a week.
No.
But just from loading it, you gain confidence, your pain gets under control, you can improve blood supply to areas, so you're kickstarting healing.
That psychological almost impact is so important.
It's massive.
Yeah,
massive,
so important.
massive. But yeah, like I say, I think it varies from injury to injury, but the amount of times people come in and it's either they've been to see a physio, and again, it's like an acute injury like that, where it's a hamstring tear, and they're like 4 or 5 weeks post-injury. They've been seeing a physio, and I'm like, what have you done so far? And they're like, well, they've rubbed it, and I've stretched it.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, you've got like 5 weeks of progress that has just gone to waste. Like you can load and now, especially that when it comes to muscle strains and muscle tears like that now, all the evidence suggests that like actually the earlier you load it, even if you push to the point where it's keeping you in pain for the first few weeks, your outcomes then like 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks are that much better than waiting for your pain to go and then starting to work.
So do you think the advice is, if you do have an acute injury like that, is carry on but under guidance?
Yeah, 100%. Or at least if you, seek the help of a professional, but if they don't at least say like, these are the exercises that we're doing, or these are the exercises I want you to start as soon as it's comfortable to do so. If they don't give you some sort of exercise or load-based strategy for managing it, like you need to question them and pull them up on that. And again, like I say, the time frames and the extent to which you're going to be loading it really depend on what the pathology is, like how injured you are. If it's a broken leg, obviously it's not a question of saying like we're squatted now in plaster, but it might be that like, hey, while your leg is broken, you're in a cast, let's keep your hips strong, let's do something to try and make sure like your quad doesn't waste away, your hamstring doesn't waste away, and then as soon as that cast comes off your leg, we're doing A, B and C to get it moving straight away.
Sorry, I was just bringing up memories, because I wasted so much money on a so-called physio or sports physio when I had that tendonitis stuff in my Achilles. And then when we loaded it isometrically or whatever else, because we were increasing blood flow to it and everything like that, it was manageable. It was raceable. I could run on it. So
Do you feel any frustration though sometimes if you ever have said to someone, no, you need to rest this, and they're like, nah, I'm going to go for a run?
Yes. Yes. But again, like I'd much rather that, like the amount of conversations I have with people where I'm really having to kind of push them on and say like, it's okay to move, like you need to work this, and people are like, no, I'll wait. Or like I say to people like, you need to go away and do this for next week, and then by the time I see you again, it'll feel much better. And I've come back and like, yeah, it's still kind of the same. Like, what have you done? Right, nothing really, it hurt. It's like, well, that's literally the exact conversation we had last time about like what we're trying to do and what we're trying to push on with.
You've got to help yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And like I say, just the people really overestimate the ability of like passive modalities and low level modalities to make a difference, and they massively underestimate the impact that exercise and load has on everything. And like we said, the base, even for things like, if someone comes in with like chronic low back pain, similar to what we were talking about with like the kind of someone who wants to come in and do high rocks, the first thing I'll say is like, you need to be loading and strengthening this. If your base case, whether it's like a pulled hamstring or back pain or chronic shoulder pain, if your base case is like you are stiff, weak, inactive, sedentary, like then it doesn't matter how much we kind of try and get you stretching and foam rolling, you're still just trying to get something moving that is inherently fragile anyway. So there's all sorts of frustrations involved in it. But for them,
I feel like we could talk about this for
No, we really
ages.
could. We really could, especially with someone like the two of you guys who have such a sort of base knowledge. It's super interesting for me. Max, if people want to find out more about you, how would they do that?
So Instagram is mh_strength coach. And then in the next few weeks, hopefully by the time this goes live, new website will be up, painfreeperformance.coach. So you can find me there. But otherwise, I'm based down at MSC Performance in Birmingham. We can pretty much always find me.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for being here today.
No, thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone for listening. Remember that you can watch us all on our YouTube channel as well. This has been the Perk and Pace podcast. I'm Lydia.
I'm Matt.
And thank you, Max.
Thank you for having me.
And see you later.